Welcome to Wired to Lead, the podcast where neuroscience meets leadership. Hi, I'm Julia LeFevre, and each week we're going to explore how our brains impact our behavior and how we can rewire our brains so that we can lead with clarity, confidence, and impact. Are you ready? Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wired to Lead. I'm excited to introduce you to Christopher Swing. Chris is the president and CEO of Vantage Surgical Solutions. He is a purpose-driven executive leader known for blending strategic vision with relational leadership to drive meaningful progress in healthcare and beyond. I experienced that the very first time when one of his first questions to me was, how are you going to scale? So, Chris, welcome to Wired to Lead.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. By the way, so that's a true story. One of the first things I was telling him about Brave Restoration, and he just looked at me and said, how are you going to scale? And I thought, I probably should think about that. And I honestly have not stopped thinking about it since. So thank you for getting that ball rolling. Is that a typical conversation for you as you interact
really.
with other leaders? No.
No, because in most of the instances that I'm in, I try to listen to what people are struggling with, and I found that if you add value to people, right, it brings that back to you in many ways, and that's just done me well through my career. And so, as I was listening to your story, I was like, wow, this is a great organization, but like, you're a person, like one person, and so how do you ever make that into something which really causes the impact in which I think you want to create? So
Yeah, well, it's true. So tell us about your leadership journey, and I'm curious to see how that plays out in the ways that you have invested in people along the way. But who is Chris, the leader, and how did your journey bring you here?
yeah, so I've made a lot of stops. I'm kind of unique, I would say, in the business world because I've been in so many different industries. So I started out in manufacturing, in
Okay.
book printing. Then I moved into food manufacturing, and then I came to healthcare. And in addition to that, I also sit on a bank board. And so uh, along the way, I've also been an insurance agent and done many other things. And so I think the thing that I like to talk about a lot is I think so often we get focused that once we get into an industry, we're kind of stuck.
Mhm.
And I think this is a perfect example of your story, right? Is you're like, this isn't working. I need to do something different. And so how do I take those skills that I've gained and use them in a way that's meaningful somewhere else? And I think you'll have a great impact in the business world.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's so interesting. My brain went automatically to even just, anything that there's value in diversification, in learning from places outside of what's comfortable and what we know. And so, how have you seen that kind of play out? And how does having been in the manufacturing business impacted the way you interact in the healthcare world?
Well, let me first say that myself, in the manufacturing world was a lot different than myself today, right? Because that
Uh-huh.
was a long time ago. And so, there's obviously a maturation process that happens as you grow and spend time. And so, how I acted then, I think dramatically affects how I act today, but not because necessarily the industry as much as just the fact that I was a bull in the china shop back then when I was young. And I came to the realization that, yeah, that probably got the impact ultimately that I was hoping for, but it probably took a lot longer to get there than if I just would maybe be more uh, uh, direct but understanding of people's situations, and then try to help them to see what my perspective is so that way they could understand what I was actually shooting for, as opposed to just saying, this is what our goal needs to be and let's go type thing. So
Let's do this. Yeah. Really this show is really geared toward helping people understand that a lot of us, we are shaped, we're wired to lead based on our past experiences. And sometimes it means rewiring some ways that we had tried originally. And so tell us more about what that was like. How did, so many people come in and they come into a leadership position or into a workplace, and it's full steam ahead, and I'm going to be uh, shooting for these outcomes and at all costs. And how did you learn those lessons of recognizing that bottom line outcomes aren't maybe the best way to go?
So I want to talk about two things really quick, if you don't mind.
Sure.
First of all, let's talk about the transition from peer to boss, right? So
Uh,
that first transition is the hardest one you'll ever make,
yeah.
because most people will be promoted within the same organization, and so they're going from being a peer to their counterparts to being their supervisor, and that is a very difficult thing. And so, you know, rewiring, kind of going back and thinking about that transition, I don't know if I would be successful today had I done it differently. So, I mean, I
Mm,
think that's part of what we have to keep in mind, is that it's really easy to say, well, this version of me would do something dramatically different in that situation. But having experienced lots of promotions, not for myself, but for my peers and for, some of my previous employees, one of the biggest struggles that they always have is when they have to transition from being a peer to being the supervisor or boss. And so I want to keep that in mind as we kind of talk through this. And then also, in addition to that, I think it's important to realize that, every environment that we operate in is a little bit unique. And so what's effective in one environment may not be effective in another. But tell me again what your question was. I'm sorry.
well, now I just want to talk about some of these things. We'll circle
Yeah.
back
Okay.
to lessons learned, but uh, yeah, I one of the things I hear you saying is that I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't walked the journey I've walked. And
Yeah.
that journey may include mistakes, but it also may just include experiences that are shaping me. And so, uh,
Well, it for sure includes lots of mistakes,
yeah,
right? I mean, that's how we get to where we are. And
yeah,
I think those are the things that we want to quickly brush off and say, hey, this isn't important, or if I did it again, I wouldn't do that again. But the reality is that we learn way more from our mistakes than we learn from our success.
yeah,
And and so if you start going back and unwinding or rewiring or whatever you want to call it, and you wipe out those experiences that changed who you aren't who you are anymore. And so and the other side of it is like the ebbs and flows of life in general. There's no way to reconcile, right, when you start taking out pieces that you say, man, I wish I didn't do this, or man, I wish I didn't do that. There's a whole lot of things that I would do differently today. But like, it's really hard to say, oh, I should have been this person. Then yeah, I probably should have. Knowing who I am today, I would be much more proud of that person if they acted like I do today. But a lot of those things create opportunities for us along the way, and I wouldn't be here. I mean, there's no question about it. Like there's not a lot of difference. And I think that's what the other thing that people kind of
Mhm.
misunderstand is they think that there is something in us when we were born that enables us to get to this point. I can tell you unequivocally that is not the case. Like there is nothing special about me that allowed me the career that I have. There's nothing special about me that enabled me to go to college at first to a 2-year local community college and then to a 4-year degree and then subsequently to a master's program. Like those are all just situations that came up and I had to decide, okay, so am I going to do this or am I not going to do this? And when I went to junior college, the reason I went to junior college was because I knew if I went straight to college, I would get lost, like just
Mhm.
on the campus and everything that was going on. And because I wasn't that mature, I wasn't ready for that. And so, all those steps, painful as they may be today, looking back on them, they all created me for who I am today. So
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought all of that up because I think sometimes when we look back at things that we may or may not have been proud of, if we do it with the perspective that there should be shame or I should feel bad about that or I should even have done it differently, it it actually activates the part in our brain that says hide or
mm,
defend or the fight or flight responses. And that's why I work with leaders to help them with their capacity for integration, which is essentially being able to look back and see it, but almost see it with a different lens of, okay, that was a mistake, and it exactly what you've said, it taught me and it shaped me into who I am today, and because I learned from it. And I think that's the key is, when we look back, we can recognize things that we did maybe not the way that we would today. Thank goodness we're not the same people we were back then, right? And that's the goal. And we don't have to look back with shame or, I mean, there can be regret, I guess, but we can transform those experiences by recognizing the lessons we learned and recognizing the gift that they are now to us today.
yeah, and you never know what those experiences are, right? That really make a difference. Because I go back to my childhood, like my dad owned a failed grain elevator and it wasn't through any fault of their own. They just had a fire and the insurance company decided not to pay for it. I can tell you that dramatically altered how I do business, right? And I mean,
Mm.
as much as I think about things from my childhood that affected me. We lived in the largest house in town and we moved to the smallest house in town, and the president of the bank still lives in the house I lived in. Those are all really unique experiences that caused me to be who I am. But I don't know that that's really what caused me to have success, or maybe it was my jerky self when I was a young manager, or maybe it was my, hey, I don't really care who we run over as long as we get to this result kind of thing. And I
Mm.
think a lot of us go through that early in our careers. Fortunately for us, fortunately for many of us at least, those people had a lot of grace with us, right? And they realized where we were at in our journey because they also saw what they were like when they were that age and trying to make a difference. And I don't think, like I don't think there was malice in my early leadership. It was just that it was less about here's what we're trying to accomplish and more about here's where we've got to be,
Mm.
type of scenarios.
Absolutely. So I also hear you saying that maybe your definition of success has changed or morphed over
Oh,
the years. Tell us about that. What was your definition of success in the early years and how has it changed today?
yeah. So, I mean, I think for most leaders, success changes and it changes dramatically over your career. When I first started out, It was all about getting to a result. But then after a while, you start to realize that whatever goal you pick, you exceed it at some point in time. And I think that's one of the powers of setting goals for yourself, right? Is that whether you activate something in your creative subconscious or whatever it is, you have this way of figuring out a meaningful solution to a problem, which is, hey, I'm not at this goal. And so, as I think back, it was all about a number or about a job title or about uh, a staff size or a company size or whatever you want to call it. But, I've had the opportunity to be a senior leader in a $1.4 billion business. And after you do that, it's kind of like, okay, so are we going to pick a $25 billion business? Are we going to pick a $100 billion business? Does it even matter? Like, I don't even know what $1.4 billion looks like. Like that doesn't even mean anything. It's so crazy when you get to those big businesses. The first thing that we do is we lop off the last three zeros. And so you make everything smaller so it's more rational and so you could actually connect with it. And so even they realize like, we're this big business and so nobody knows what that means. And so in order to make it more reasonable, we just take three zeros out of the number. Um,
Okay, I will say I've always wondered, like my brain is not big enough or smart enough or something enough to just even wrap around the idea of billions.
right.
And now I feel better because even a liter of
We aren't
that is
either.
the same.
Yeah. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Everybody just makes it smaller because it is so it's such a disconnect from reality, right? With so many zeros that you start to go, okay, well, it doesn't really matter. It's
Mm.
not a big. And so I think as you transition along, especially someone who has an impact leadership strategy, like what I kind of visualize myself to be, it becomes about the people that you grow into roles, the people that work alongside of you that you rely on every day, and their success. And so that's different for everybody, right? Some people want job titles. It kind of goes back to where you were when you were that in that role of trying to define what's that next version of me look like. And so now it's about, okay, so who are those people that had meaningful impact, not only current employees, but even former employees. Like I have really great relationships with some of my interns that I brought into this business in a summer capacity and said, I have no idea how to do this, but if you can do this for us during this summer, you will meaningfully impact this business. And they were successful at it. And so, I don't even know looking back, like I had a regular employee try to tackle some of these things later on, years and years later. And they weren't successful at doing something an intern did, maybe 6 or 8 years before that. And so it's like, it's just investing back into those people who've enabled me to be successful in my own mind, I guess.
Sure. Sure. So I want to go back a little bit to you've mentioned a couple of things that we're going to circle back to. So the first thing is that some things that happened in childhood, not even to you directly, but it did impact you directly with your dad's business burning down. You said it completely
Mhm.
changed how I lead. Uh, Tell us more about that. What really landed with you in that in that lived experience?
So the two things that I think I can most meaningfully take away is that I'm a much more of a risk manager
Mm,
than I think what my parents were, because they don't look at all of those things and think about, okay, what were the risks that we were dealing with every day, and do we have adequate insurance coverage? And the sad part is they did.
yeah.
And that's why I told you that I was an insurance agent after that, because my dad went to solve the world's problems and said, I don't want one of my friends to have to go through the same thing. And so he went to the insurance world, and and I think he's done a pretty good job of making sure that the people that he cares about are protected in the event that something happens.
Mm.
Whereas like he didn't feel like he had that with his business.
Right.
And then I think secondarily, the thing um, that it caused me to think about is asset protection,
Mm.
which is different than many businesses think about, which is, what kind of legal structure are we operating under? What legal entity should different, assets or parts of the operating business be operated under? I will tell you that that's a lot different when you get into billion-dollar businesses because you have amazing legal counsel for
Yeah.
those organizations. And, just to give you a kind of a glimpse into that, like we had a separate legal entity that borrowed all the money for the entire organization. Now, for most small businesses, you can't get away with that, but we were issuing bonds in the billions. And so that gave us the ability to strategically limit the access of those bondholders to some of those assets that they were, contributing to help support us to buy. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't invest in legal resources to know how to operate in a way that, things are going to happen. Like, okay, so let's talk about my business now.
Yeah.
So I'm running cataract surgery equipment in 25 states every single day. And that looks like a Mercedes Sprinter van or a uh, Honda Pilot or Honda CRV or whatever. I mean, we're driving around in lots of different vehicles.
Yeah.
We drive about 5 to 6 times around the earth every year.
Wow.
So talk about a lot of risk, right? That's out there on the road.
Mm-hmm.
One of the riskiest things you have are work comp and auto liabilities and things like that. And so in addition to that, like that's not enough. I'm in surgery every day in those states. And so, we're probably in 15 to 20 hospitals every single day, doing cataract surgery on anywhere from 5 to, I don't know, 42 patients, I think is the most we've ever done a day. And so, lots of patients, 25,000 plus procedures a year. And so, you know, risk is abundant, I guess, is how I would describe this business. And so just understanding like, how to position those things and make sure that you're actively deciding instead of passively waiting until something happens and then saying, oh, that was a big mistake.
Yeah, I hear you. When you first said I am a risk manager, much more than my dad was, I was picturing someone who's going to avoid anything that is risky, and so I love that you kind of spelled this out, that it doesn't mean you avoid risk. It just means you're proactive in attending to it and preparing for the things that could happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So, because I kept thinking this feels so ironic that I would think you would be risk averse, but you're you are. I mean, there's risk everywhere. And so, but it does tell me something that, a lot of the work that I do is helping leaders to build that capacity for leaning into hard things. It doesn't mean that our past situations, it could have wired you in a different way. It could have made you feel helpless and
Mhm.
like, well, oh well. But honestly, watching your dad say, you know what, I've learned from this. I wasn't thinking proactively about this. And now I'm going to help other people to avoid that mistake because I've learned. And I wonder if that helped you to see kind of there's this way forward that's empowering in a
I-
sense.
I'm positive that that's part of it. I mean, you know, we're not the type of people that sit around and feel sorry for ourselves. And so, I think that has such an impact on your kids, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's the one gift that my dad gave me was, he was broke most of my life, but I still had everything I needed.
Mm.
And it was like, you can sit around and feel sorry about what the situation that we're under is, but that doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah.
But I
And
mean, you think about the people that went through the Great Depression, right? Like
yeah.
I think some of what you have to balance, right, is the how big of a group went through the same experience, because I don't know, like, like when a city, one of the things I was thinking about is not too long ago we went and saw the Oklahoma City uh, memorial, and those people all got together and they just said, "Look, we're going to make something great out of something terrible." But that's not always the case. That if you go back to the Great Depression, I mean, I think there was a lot of people that said, "Hey, we're going to think about this and do things dramatically differently so that way this doesn't ever happen to us again." But sometimes those um, reactions can be very negative, right? And so, we wouldn't want to go through the Great Depression, not because of the impact of the Great Depression, but like the seismic shift in how people handled money and how people thought about their money after that. Like, I still think we're kind of recovering economically from those folks, because if you think about where a lot of the money, the wealth exists in the world today, right? Especially in the United States, it's in people who are the closest to folks who went through the Great Depression. And so they've learned from those experiences. And I think that there's, there's lots of different variations of where you came from. It's like, okay, well, like you said, you can be paralyzed by it, or you can be empowered by it, or something in the middle.
Yeah.
And I think that anytime you go through seismic impact across a wide variety of people, there's it's a lot easier, I think, to get stuck in a rut where everybody feels sorry for themselves because nobody's in a situation really uh to get out, uniquely different than anybody else. Whereas, like, for my dad, he was sitting there coming out of a failed business going, my kids go to school and everybody else is fine. My kids need to eat, and, you know, we can't just sit here and be like, hey, we've got to find some way to feed these guys.
Sure.
And unfortunately we were still growing, and, shoes and clothes. And I mean, it's like, I I can't imagine what it was, what kind of pressure it was like then. I think about the pressure that I deal with on a daily basis, and um, and you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And I'm like, I struggle with things that are completely unimportant in the whole scheme of things, whereas there's a whole lot of people out there that struggle to meet their basic necessity, the food and shelter and clothes.
Yeah. It's, at the end of the day, it is a different type of pressure, and yet our brains and our bodies process pressure kind of the same. And
Mm.
so how do you handle some of those pressures? What do you do to keep yourself sane and balanced, and or
So
what do
they
you
all,
wish you could
yeah,
do?
that's
I
fair.
think I remember
Thanks
asking
for
you
the
if you
out.
had boundaries, and you
Yeah.
said something like, "I'm flying in at 1:30 in the morning."
Yeah.
No, I don't have
Yeah.
boundaries.
Yeah. I think I lack boundaries, and I lack the ability to say no a lot of times. It's
Mm,
which is kind of funny, because so many people think that CEOs are unapproachable, and the reality is that people are afraid of themselves, not of the people that they're going to talk to. And so, now I will tell you that the one thing that is different about me is that I'm very consistent. And I think that's a positive thing for my employees. And that's true unless you ask me a question that you get the answer no to, in which case then they're really frustrated because they'll always get the same answer.
mm,
But yeah, so to relieve my stress, there's a couple of things that I think have been critical in enabling me to deal with just an insurmountable amount of uh, pressure that I would call pressure on myself, which
Yeah.
is, we have lots of people in lots of different places that are counting on us every day to provide an organization that is sustainable and that is, you know, enables them to meet their personal and professional objectives. And that doesn't come without a lot of weight. And especially as I get older and those things are more important to me,
Yeah.
and the success, as a bottom line is less important to me. There's a whole lot of people that work for me every day that need me to make sure that they get paid so that way they can survive. And that's an unfortunate situation. That's a situation that we've tried to rectify by providing, like Dave Ramsey courses and things like that. Because I think that that's an unfortunate world that we live in, where people think that if you have stuff, then you're wealthy, which is opposite to what I think. And but anyways, so the two things that I do to eradicate stress are, one, I have a group called YPO, which is all young CEOs from across the world. There's like 37,000 of us or something like that are organized, and we meet in small groups of like 5 to 6 people every month for about 4 hours. And what we found is that everybody has the exact same problems. They're just in different forms
Yeah.
based upon what type of organization that we're in. And then the other thing that I do is, I like to go out and take walks. And, I've had employees over the years that didn't want to meet in the office. Like, we would actually go walk around. We've got a, couple mile block out here, and we would just go and meet. And I thought that was super effective. And then I live around like a 2.5 mile block in the country. And my daughter and I like to take walks and go out and try to get run over by cars everywhere because it's in the country. So, of
Yeah.
course, cars are coming by at like a million miles an hour, but it's fun.
Yeah. As you're talking about the type of pressure that you carry, you said, these are so different than my dad. And yet it's kind of the same pressure, just at a grander, you've scaled, right? So
Sure.
instead of worrying about one family, you're carrying the weight of being reliable so that many families can continue, can be sustained.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there is a lot of there's a lot of impact there, and especially, I have husband wife combos that work for me. That's a lot of pressure. Like, and those people are important to me. Like, they're really close to me.
Mm.
Probably two of my most critical staff. That is pressure. That's a whole nother layer of pressure. Hey, you're back.
Hey, you're back. Yeah,
I don't know, we froze or something.
something froze. Okay, I lost you somewhere around two of my most critical people.
Yeah, so that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Those two working directly for me, because that's like the ultimate pressure when you are the sole provider for an entire family.
Mm,
And it's bad because they're both so important to me. Like, I would love to kick one of them out just so that way I didn't carry that
have
level
to
of
have it.
pressure. But I love them both, and they're so valuable to me. Like, I can't really do that. And I've actually had both of them in their own way try to find and leave to go somewhere else, and then they come back because I need them, and they realize that, yeah, it's that sustainability portion is nice to have someone else providing for our family, but at the same time, it's a team scenario, and so they're not used to going somewhere and not having a voice and not having a vote for what's going on.
Yeah.
It's a weird scenario though.
So you're hinting at the type of culture that you've created What's important to you in culture creation for your teams?
Well, let me first say that this is my perception of the culture that I want, because I think so often we think that if we just commit to doing something, it's automatic. But the reality is, it's kind of like I kind of relate it to listening, right? And that somebody can say one thing and somebody else can hear something completely different. And that's how culture kind of works, is that you keep screaming and screaming and screaming, and you keep, you know, explaining what you want it to look like, but you can't control what other people hear and you can't control what they see.
Yeah.
So, what's important to me is that people feel valued, that they believe that we have their best interest at heart. And that's true both for our employees and for our customers. So, we're really motivated by sustaining or creating a sustainable rural healthcare system. And the two things that we think about in that is, first of all, I'm not a big believer in the federal government providing that system. And so we want to limit the amount of direct payments that happen to rural hospitals in order to sustain them. So we try to create opportunities for them to add value to their communities and help them to generate revenue that's profitable for them to help sustain themselves. And then for the employees, communication, which is a aspiration, I'll just say, we try to communicate to the best of our abilities, but anybody that operates a business today knows that there are like 50,000 channels in which you try to communicate with everyone. And I can tell you that I'm not effective at all of them. And the ones that I'm effective at, they don't want to hear or they don't want to communicate that way. So that's a constant, push and pull strategy
Yeah.
on effectively communicating, and then creating a creative environment where people actually want to solve problems, and not just wallow in them.
Mm.
Being committed to their customers and to each other. Those are the kind of the big things, and just making sure that we what we say we want to accomplish, that we actually do accomplish those things, and just maintain that level of integrity that people don't really expect from businesses anymore. And that's a hard
Mhm.
thing, to do as well, because um, there's so much pressure, and every single, we deal with hospitals, right? So you think about some of those organizations are probably as small as a couple hundred employees, and some of them are thousands of employees. And, it's really hard to meet every single person where they're at in that process. And so, but we try to do our best. We try to do the best in those people that we impact.
Sure.
So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Um,
As I listen, all of those things make sense because they're consistent with what I've heard you talk about before.
mm,
Even just investing in rural hospitals, trying to help them to become more self-sustaining kind of points back to this sense of risk management, right? Being
mhm,
proactive, trying to empower them for them to be self-sustaining instead of dependent on a government entity. Things like communication, those are things that are required for such a multifaceted organization to continue working. And yet, and it's so interesting that then your follow-up was about creativity and wanting to solve problems, because that's coming out of your experiences of,
mm.
hey, we are going to experience problems, let's empower ourselves, let's be proactive in solving them and not sink back into just feeling like we're victims and oh well.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of interconnectivity there.
Yeah. So, one last thing I would love to circle back to, just because I think it's something that so many leaders experience, and you just said it in the very beginning, the biggest challenge is moving from peer to boss. And so what do you think is at the root of that challenge, and how do you help your leaders to make that jump?
Yeah, so I think there's two things that cause a struggle there. And it's the two people that are impacted, right? So it's really hard for the leader to move out of the role of being a friend and a colleague into someone that's responsible for the department or for whatever it is that they're overseeing. And I also think that same struggle comes from the person that they're leading, because in that moment, right, they want to still have this friendship with this person, both from the manager side and from the employee side or the managed side.
Yeah.
And the struggle that they have is that relationship is needs to still have friendship in it, but it can't be the same as what it's been in the past. And the funny thing is that I would argue that some of the best managers struggle with it the most. And the reason that I say that is because they usually come from a position of being a really good person. And they usually come from a position of communication and high expectations for themselves and for others. And they're usually on a team that has similar values. And then it's really hard to differentiate yourself to move from a contributor to a manager in that environment, because, like, okay, well, I was already a contributor. Our team are all high performers. And now we need to differentiate ourselves and really take a step forward and say, you know, the team isn't going to change, but I have to change in order to effectively lead the team as we go forward. And I also think the other struggle is that a really high performing team is a team that's hard to lead. It's hard to lead because as a new manager, the first thing we want to do is have an impact, right? So we want to be able to take something to our superiors that pulled us out of that group and said, congratulations, you're the best, or we think you have the best chance of being successful as you lead this team forward. And you're like, okay, well, the team is awesome, and I'm supposed to show you that I'm able to elevate this team to another level. And it's like, I was already effective as a contributor. Now I have a less effective contributor on the team. All these people are my peers. I need to ask them to do something more than what we've done as peers. And so I just think it's a really complex uh, environment to operate in, especially for someone that comes off of a really high uh, quality team, and they're being asked to elevate them even further. And that's a lot of times who we're looking to, right, for our leadership is we want someone that's coming off that does a really good job. And a lot of times we look at the teams who are really successful for those people, and then we turn around and ask them to lead the team in which they just came off of. And because of that, they have tons of peers in that group, and they're trying to differentiate them from their peers. At the same time, they're asking them for more, being backfilled with someone who's less quality than what they were after many years team. And so it's just a real big struggle. And I think it's a place where people really need to seek support in order to make that transition. And I think it's probably early on in most people's career, and that's probably not their first or most natural thing.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is they don't have a lot of peers, right, that have already experienced it. So, like, I think about the first time I transitioned into a senior, what I would consider a senior leadership role, and it was about 6 months after I had joined an organization, and I started off at kind of a low contributor level. They identified me as having some experience and skills that would be valuable to them, and they promoted me like right off. And I was probably 24, 25 at the time, in a $120 million business. And the next closest peer was probably 55.
Oh, wow.
And so it wasn't like I had somebody to go and learn from. And it wasn't like somebody had been promoted within the organization into one of those roles in my short tenure there. And so it was really a fly blind and just kind of figure it out. Luckily for me, the one thing that I was able to do that I think enabled me to continue to move up in that organization was provide a level of consistent financial performance. And I
Mm.
did that by negotiating with different departments about, hey, if you've got, like, let's say, for instance, maintenance was saying, hey, I need to spend an extra couple $100,000 or something. Then I would go to the other departments and say, hey, who can help contribute
Mm.
from their budget to cover this maintenance expense? Because if we can not impact the business by 200 grand and still do this, that will give us dividends long term.
We all
And
win. Yeah.
it didn't come out that way. I can promise you. When I was asking for those things, I was kind of like, okay, so maintenance needs to spend 200 grand. So you're not going to spend this, and you're not going to spend this, and you're not going to spend this. But ultimately, it made an organization who was in a consistent year over year decline in volume to have consistent year over year financial performance. And then
Mm.
18 months later, they made me well, I guess, yeah, 18 months later, they made me the ops controller for Bird's Eye Vegetables North America. And that's when I entered the $1.4 billion business. And that
Yeah.
was, we acquired them off of an S1 filing go public.
So really, you cultivated relationships with, and you created a sense of collaboration for the greater good of the organization, even at a cost to maybe a certain team. But
Sure.
it sounds like, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't easy to convince them, but to be able to kind of create a framework and a vision for, hey, if we can all pitch in and work together, then I think we'll all win.
Yeah. And so what was interesting about that team is that same team, a lot of us moved into this kind of corporate structure when we bought Bird's Eye. So what was funny is the maintenance person that I had to constantly help find money to support, her husband was my engineering team lead when we went to Bird's Eye. And so because of those things and then the same was true on the HR side. So the HR manager I had in that plant became the HR lead for that organization. And so those negotiations that we had, although I wouldn't call them negotiations, it was more like, okay, this is what we're doing,
This
and
is
this
what
is
we
what,
have to do.
like, we just have to do this. Those things turned around and provided me another level of success, the next 18 months later when we really transitioned to a large business. And those people trusted me because they may not like what I had to say at the moment, but
Yeah.
that it provided a consistent result, and it enabled us to be successful in the eyes of our investors and in the eyes of our senior leadership.
Yeah. So it's interesting that, kind of back to the whole peer to boss situation, there really, there's kind of this balance that you have to have this core capacity to separate yourself, to be so defined that I can have relationship here, and we're here to do a job, and I've got to be able to know what that is and to step into those hard spaces, so that we can keep moving forward together. Otherwise, it just, the wishy-washy, having to go back and being undecided, it just doesn't do any good. And I think you're right. A lot of times people who are good at relationships sometimes have a hard time with the definition piece of stepping out, because at the end of the day, relational change is at the foundation of Maslow's hierarchy. I mean, really, like, we need to know, it's one of our core needs to know that we're connected, that we belong, that we're accepted. And so it takes some work to build both that place of safety, relational safety, and being able to step into a role, um, and be defined in that enough to kind of make that jump.
Yeah, and I think anybody that has someone that can help mentor them through that process will be much more likely to be successful.
Yeah.
But but even in a mentor environment, like every team is different. The dynamics are different, and so like the individual still needs to actively make decisions. They can't just rely upon somebody else and hope like heck it all turns out okay.
Yeah. It's why, I mean, that kind of circles into the work that I do with people, because at the end of the day, it does come down to your capacities, your
Mm.
character capacities to step into hard things. And and so mentors are great because they kind of can give you the roadmap, but they're not, you have to be the one to put the gas in the car
Yeah.
and get going. And so and they're, what neuroscience is just showing us some really amazing ways to truly build that type of capacity, and it really is exciting. So I agree that it really does come down to each person and their willingness to kind of do the work to grow their own strength. Well, Chris, we are out of time, and I feel like we could still probably go another hour. But
For sure.
um, I just, yeah, thank you for sharing your leadership journey with us. It really is your life's journey, and it's been really sweet for me to just kind of get a glimpse of what it's like to grow from a place where there's kind of this laser focused, outcomes based leadership, and to see the good in it, and then to watch the journey to success changing a little bit to I want this for people, not so much just for me and myself. So thank you for coming and sharing your story.
Yeah, no worries. It was a good environment, so thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everyone. We'll see you next time.